This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. This is part 3 of our conversation on what makes a great sentence. If you haven't listened to parts 1 and 2 yet, make sure you go back and do that. You can find those in video and downloadable audio at storyworkspodcast.com. You can also find them on the Word Essential and Storyworks YouTube channel and wherever you listen to podcasts. Desert Notes, Reflections in the Eye of a Raven by Barry Lopez. So this is full of these short, almost flash fiction, very sort of environmental, just, I don't even know how to describe it, what category you would put it in. The Denver Post called it a love song to a mountain river, spare, sensitive, alive, and elegant statement. So this is really about the prose, but also, all right, enough. Enough awkward, terrible introduction to this book. I'm going to read a short paragraph here. Crows will live in street trees in the residential areas of great cities. They will walk at night on the roofs of parked cars and peck at the grit. They will scrape the pinpoints of their talons across the steel and, with their necks out thrust, watch for frightened children listening in their beds.
Oh, that's nice. That's suitably horror-like, isn't it? And in its own,
yeah,
it's kind of got some subtext, some tone through that. Oh, again, though, you can pick up the use of evocative verbs and adjectives in there that you wouldn't normally put in a straightforward explanatory sentence. Pinpoints of their talons and nice, really visually evocative.
Yeah, it is, and it builds to a surprise at the end. And this is the third sentence in this piece, the raven. So it's not, the paragraph has a punch, but it's not like a scene hook or a chapter end hook. It's just, and crows will live in street trees. It sounds like, oh, the Nature Channel.
Yeah, that's normal.
And crows will live in street trees, right? Fine. Yeah. But then, okay, they walk at night on the roofs of parked cars and peck at the grit. Fine. More kind of, sure, crow behavior.
Well, still, though, that's starting to get a little bit, we've gone from nature to walking on roofs of cars, and then there's a
and then
evocative sound that comes with that.
Pinpoints of their talons. Okay, now we're going deeper. Now it's starting, we're twisting this, we're going somewhere else. And they aren't just walking on the pinpoints, they're scraping them. It's like intentional, like, oh, the crows are vandals, right?
Yeah.
And necks out thrust, they watch for frightened children listening in their beds. So now the crows have become like full characters.
Sentient.
Right? Yep. Yeah. Yes. And very macabre, very almost horror. Like, so it's a nice surprise.
With the necks out thrust as well. It's almost like they're scraping across the top of the cars, and then all of a sudden they're stopped, and the neck is out thrust, and listening. It's that's really great. I like that.
Yeah, it's very visual, and he doesn't describe the crow to us. We know what a crow looks like, so it's all, the visual is all in what the crow is doing.
Yes.
I'm guessing so Kathryn has her mic muted.
Yeah, so you can argue that
I'm going to make her talk.
Yes, I do have my mic muted. Sorry.
That's okay.
It's to some degree it's exposition, it's scene setting, but it's such a great example of exposition as ammunition. That whole show don't tell is written all over that series of sentences. Nice.
Isn't it? Yeah. Yes, and the story is called The Raven. So then in the next paragraph, we go to the raven. Put all this to the raven. He will open his mouth as if to say something. Then he will look the other way and say nothing. Later, when you have forgotten, he will tell you he admires the crow.
Weird.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
But another kind of surprise, like, why were we looking at the crow? We were looking at the crow so we can juxtapose it with the raven. Yep, exactly, so we can understand the raven. Yeah.
And also the raven is singular, whereas crows it's just a horde of things in the street. But then we zoom into the raven.
Right.
It's not ravens, looking away from crows. The raven.
Yeah, and it's you, the reader, so all of a sudden you feel like instead of just observing what you do with the crows, now you're sitting down with the raven having a conversation.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because really, if you boil it down, there were scary black crows out in the street. Mm-hmm. You could say, let's say I'm writing that in first draft. There were scary black crows in the street, and the raven seemed to take notice of them. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Next. Whereas you come back and you revise. How can I make that more compelling? How can I weave that into something that's rich?
Right.
How can I show that sense of scary crows in the street? And that's marvelous. I like it.
Yeah, me too. I think this is a beautiful book, so I recommend it if anyone wants some light reading.
It'll be in the show notes.
Yeah, it might be out of print, so you might be
steal Alida's copy.
No. No, if you want it, get it fast, because there are probably only so many out there. Floating around books or something. All right. The Poisonwood Bible, Barbara Kingsolver, one of my favorites.
I finally broke down and checked that out from the library, so eventually I will know exactly what Alida is talking about.
Okay. Good. Good. All right. So a child has died, and the narrator is the child's sister. The trilling of our neighbors' tongues set loose knives that cut the flesh from our bones and made us fall down with our shame and our love and our anger. We were all cut down together by the knife of our own hope. For if there is any single thing that everyone hopes for most dearly, it must be this, that the youngest outlive the oldest. So 2 sentences, but the first one is the one that just really grabbed me.
Well, that's 4 in there.
Right? Okay, wow. This book is full of those sentences where you read it and you go, wow. Wow, yeah. Right? Reverence. All hail Barbara Kingsolver. The Poisonwood Bible.
I couldn't get on with it. I started it and got 3 chapters and then gave up. There were too many points of view. That was the main thing for me.
Okay.
Yeah, didn't like that. I wanted to follow one character or 2.
Okay.
Yeah, but it follows the 4 siblings. Is that
4
right?
sisters, and then the mother occasionally has a point of view. Not often. She just has a few appearances. Primarily, it's the 4 sisters.
And their voices are very different,
right?
As well. So if you get attached to one of them, and then you suddenly sprung into one of the others, it's kind of. I found that jarring for me. So it's a totally personal thing. It's clearly a magnificent story. Wouldn't argue with the way that the story was unfolding. It just was mostly about the multiple points of view and the difference in their voices, which obviously you want. I mean, you don't want to have. But maybe it's this is an interesting thing. I'll go back and have another look. Maybe the writing is so evocative that I got totally limpet attached to one of the characters and was disappointed when they didn't
switched.
have. So it was so compelling. Whereas for you're sort of luxuriating in that, and my impatience as a reader, because I like fast paced, was struggling with that.
Right. Well, I definitely had my favorite sister as narrator, but one of the things, and we're getting a little off topic here, but just to kind of finish up the multiple POV thing, one of the reasons I adore this book is because she did manage to make all four sisters so distinct. You know who's telling that chapter of the story without looking at the name at the top because of the voice. And so she really has four narrators, and they're sisters. They're all from the same household, the same culture, the same knowledge, the same background, but completely distinct.
Yeah, so, and that would come through in the sentence construction the narrator chooses.
Yeah.
So I think your point earlier on was that, this comes through in the narrator's voice. We have to remember that the construction is not the author's construction. The construction is the construction the author has chosen for the narrator's construction of their voice. It's like a meta-meta.
Yeah. That's a really good point, Robert, because even if you have an authorial narrator, your voice as that narrator is going to be different. You're going to put on a persona that suits that story within that genre, right? So, my murder mystery should not sound like my 1920s historical fiction. If it does, I'm in trouble, right? And neither of them should sound like the way I speak to my friends because I'm writing. So when you look at, this is Leah, she's my favorite of the narrators because I do like the lyrical prose. And then one of them, Ada, always speaks in palindromes, which is a very
challenging,
impressive trick. The other teenager, the eldest daughter, has kind of a snarky voice. Maybe I shouldn't say so, but it's true. Leah is the cause of all our problems. It goes back, right? So that is a very different voice.
Yes.
Then, now, of course, we couldn't think of birds. The trilling of our neighbors' tongues set loose knives that cut the flesh from our bones. Not the same person.
Yeah, very different.
Right?
Very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, somebody who perceives life in a completely different way, his worldview is totally different, and it comes through in the sentence constructions.
Yeah. Yes, powerfully. Well said, Robert. Yeah.
So I want to ask about that as you're talking about your historical fiction. How do you change your sentences? Do you change them to reflect like the historical time period or some of the diction or some of the things that would happen in that time period?
For my Victorian novel, yes. From where you're going back in time far enough that the diction really is quite distinct. I do, but not to the extent that it's going to be awkward to read.
Right.
I'm not trying to make it cumbersome for readers. So I try to watch my dialogue especially and make my narrative evoke the period, but not necessarily be accurate, 100% accurate, right? With the 1920s piece, it's more that I've fallen into the voice of this story, and it's omniscient, so it's a richer, more fluid voice with these longer sentences like Leah has, like these few I've just read here, where we're going kind of multiple directions within one sentence with our imagery and our emotions and such. There's more room for that in literary prose or, historical prose where you want to be or omniscient. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've talked about you need to use your sentence to make your story unique, right?
Right.
And about like the way that your voice is and setting of mood and that sort of thing. But I was just wondering, about that in historical. That's really cool that you can kind of portray all of that. It's just something else that you can think about is that individual sentence level portrayal of the historical setting.
Yeah,
really.
And I think when you find the voice of the piece, your job is to be consistent with it. So if you're writing a hard-boiled detective story, that's going to be a very different piece, a very different voice than a lyrical story or a historical story. So it's not that one writer couldn't successfully embody each of those voices. You just need to find the one that works for your story and then be consistent.
Yeah, I was just going to give an example of specifically that hard-boiled detective. Just finished reading a couple of weeks back an Australian author who sadly passed away last year, Peter Temple, and it's called Truth. It's set in Melbourne in a time of probably 10 years ago now. Gangland was big in Melbourne. It probably still is, actually. But and it follows. There's one POV, but the writing is so sparse. It actually makes you work quite hard to get the hooks are so good that you do, and then after a while, it's every sentence is like a punch. There's very little in there. It's totally evocative of this a detective's life that's really, it's loveless. It's, he's got his own stuff going on as is usual with these things, family problems, the career that's caused the family problems, and
right.
And there is some of the dialogue is just, breakfast. That's it. Breakfast. You want breakfast? It's like, how about we go and get some breakfast? No, it's just breakfast. And then, it's sometimes, his phone. What? That's it. It's just his phone. What? So when you first start reading, you got to work out what's going on there. Has he picked up his phone? Is he
right?
Is the phone ringing? No, it's all gone. There's just his phone. What? Holds it. So
I see. Yeah.
Incredibly graphic, the field that it creates. It was a remarkable read for that reason.
That's
and then if I think about, say, how I've tried to portray different characters in the past, definitely worked on sentence construction in dialogue, where aliens, for example, don't use contractions, and I just picked that up because when the remake of True Grit, I thought was fantastic that the characters didn't speak with any contractions. That is not something that I do not do that. I don't do that. I do not do that.
Right. And for us to speak without contractions, to remove those, it sounds stiff and goofy, and we would never do it. But you brought up True Grit. Those actors had to deliver all of those lines with as much speed and power and emotion as was appropriate for the moment. So the removing contractions didn't slow them down, or it didn't make them feel stiff or flat.
No, that's right. So I know we're sort of zooming in on some it's not exactly talking about beautiful sentences, but the construction appropriate to the voice, I think.
Right.
Yeah, what you brought up there with those four sisters and how that's clearly determined by the way that they string words together. I think you can't emphasize that enough, that if you read a book that doesn't work and it's, let's say they're trying to do multiple POV or dual POV, both in first person, that's when you're going to pick it up the most. And you think, I can't tell the difference between these characters.
Right.
Because they're written in the author's voice.
Yes.
And that's when your sentence construction, you really have to think about what you're doing.
Yeah, and if you're trying to write multiple first-person POVs and they sound the same in narrative, go to third person. Have an authorial narrator so you can be consistent, and then just focus on your dialogue and perspective for those. All right, grand finale.
Come on then. Give us your best.
All right, I flagged more than one sentence here. This could be tough. Okay. This is from, of course, ta-da, The Great Gatsby. It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced, or seemed to face, the whole external world for an instant, and then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor.
Who wouldn't want that directed at them, hey?
Right? Yeah.
Nice. And this disembodied smile.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's not perhaps as lyrical as the sentence out of the Poisonwood Bible that I chose, but it conveys so much, and you feel like, so this is a first-person narrator, of course, Nick Carraway, and don't you sort of feel the glow of that smile, just like Nick does, the way it's described? So we really get to live that moment vicariously, and speaking of historical voice, this, of course, was written in the 1920s. And so this language, it concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. Would we say an irresistible prejudice in your favor? Or would we just say...
No.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly.
So... Part of that quality might be that it comes from a different period, but clearly a literary writer here.
I think though it's important, I think, to be well read if you want to improve your prose specifically. I think being as well read as you possibly can, even in genres that you wouldn't normally read in.
Yes,
they're the things that osmotically give you learning that you're going to pick up on richness like that. I mean, even to the degree where this current program we're going through, where we're deconstructing the beats of a particular core scene of a novel, and then we're being tasked to deliver some homework using only those beats as the construction. So writing a story in the same genre, totally out of place. You've got no context of the story, but you've got to follow the only constriction as you have to follow the same beats, and it's remarkable. And I think that's taking obviously to the nth degree, but in a way, reading great fiction,
right,
or fiction that's stuck with other people, is doing the same, but so kind of osmotically, you're taking in their structure. And we've started, this whole series of discussions saying that when you actually drill down to it, that isn't necessarily that you're putting a great sentence out by itself and putting it up on a pedestal and saying that one should win. It's the greatest sentence ever written. It's not the case. It's all about the delivery or the economy or the grandness or the punch or the start or the ending or the
the rhythm, the build, the voice,
all of those things. So I think if there's one thing I have pulled out, it's probably choice of hard or soft words, choice of verbs that are packed more than verbs that aren't, seems to be something that perhaps might come to the fore when you're going back and revising. You would say, how can I express this sentence differently? But to some degree, we might have looked at it and said, well, actually, the writer has chosen 3 evocative sentences when perhaps a lesser writer, or in first draft, it may have just been the crows were in the street.
Right.
So you just don't know. But I do think being widely read, and even things going back to Great Gatsby, you might not use that phrase now, but that could stick in your mind as a way of illustrating a particularly pompous character in a book, or or an alien species, but using different words. So I do think that's interesting. And have you read? I think it's called Self-Editing, How to Edit Yourself into Print by Rennie Brown, and I can't remember the other author. There's 2 of them. It's wonderful, and they take an entire, it must be one scene, I think, from The Great Gatsby, and then they rewrite it badly.
That would be easy to do.
And it's only then that you realise just how wonderfully it's done. It's this people leaning in hushed voices, and then in the rewrite it's just totally, it's worth it's really worth grabbing that book just for that, because I was laughing when I was reading it. It was really fun. Because what happens, I think, is with fantastic prose, it becomes invisible.
Right.
And just occasionally, that's probably why we find it hard to say, oh, let's go and find some great sentences. And you go, no, but they're all invisible. And it's only when the one that catches your eye, but maybe it's also all those 6 or 7 around it that made that one stand out.
Yes, very much so. That's why it's so hard to just read one sentence and take it out of context. You need a little bit of fill around it for it to shine.
And I mean, in my view, The Great Gatsby was very much like that. Although it's flowery prose, it's very economical.
It is, and it's full of gorgeous imagery. I mean, that sentence I read isn't so much about the imagery as it is about the feeling it evokes for me. This book is a powerhouse. And then, yes. All right. Takeaways, things we've learned about sentences. I think, so we probably can't do this episode justice with a summary, but Kathryn will do the marvelous show notes, and then you'll have all those talking points right there in the show notes. Yeah, but kind of a final thought or something.
I'd love to hear what other people think about, what are some of their favorite sentences, or, could they go back to a work that's stuck in their mind and tell us why it is? Is it something about the prose? Is it, that you could relate to?
I love that. So go to the Storyworks Writers Facebook group, post a sentence, and tell us a little something about why you think it's a great sentence or not. Maybe you found a clunker you want to share with the group, and let's get some discussion going. That'd be awesome. Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.